Good morning. Thank you for joining us for the Spring Landscape and Turf Grass webinar series. Today, we are pleased to have Rick Smith, owner of the Pruning Guru, who will present pruning preparation for the spring and summer. Please keep your audio on mute during the presentation and enter any questions you may have in the chat box. At the end of the presentation, I'll read the questions, and we will also open up the mics for you to ask questions. Rick, I'll stop sharing my screen now, and if you don't mind, go ahead and start yours and you can get started. Thank you so much for being here.
My goal, as I've always done, is try to educate everybody on proper pruning. As you know, there's quite a few styles out there. You know, the little green meatballs, the squares, the Mickey Mouse type of pruning. The pruning that I love teaching about is pruning for the plant to look natural and healthier. And why do we prune? So anyway, why do we prune? We're pruning for symmetry, health of the plant, containment, and production. Health of the plant is removing dead branches, you know, like this. A lot of people, especially homeowners, don't realize that taking off that nub is probably as important than anything else, because if you don't, you can see where the decay starts at the top and will work all the way down. Here's another example where just a broken branch was, where the broken branch has occurred, and I pruned it, and you can see where the decay is. All right, so anytime you can on tree limbs, on the shrubs, so, you know, this is a tree, so imagine what it'll do on the shrub. Containment, keeping a tree or shrub in bounds of its planted area. This drives me insane. Somebody puts in a 3-gallon Japanese maple. They think it will never grow. They call me up and ask me if I can create a miracle and push it back in bounds. And anybody who knows about Japanese maples, you can't do that. Production, we prune for the blooms and for the fruit. The camellia blooms, for an example. And don't forget that sasanquas are going to start budding. Last year, they started budding up at the end of July. With the way this season's been, I'm not quite sure if it's going to be July or August, but keep in mind that they're going to be budding soon. So do all your pruning you can now. Blooms for your rhododendrons. Now fruit, for example, can distort, blooms can distort the size of the fruit. So if you can see on the right, you have the bloom of a banana. If you cut that off, you can see the the fruit on the left side that's circled. The bananas are a whole lot larger, and the reason why is all the energy is going to the fruit, not to the bloom. All right, do the job right and be safe. Never get in a hurry. Use the right tool for the job. Always know where your fingers are. Do not take shortcuts. One thing that is very important is safety, and having all of your safety equipment with the hearing, the eye protection, the gloves, chaps. Obviously, the chainsaw is only used in dire needs when it comes to pruning shrubs and ornamental trees, but just I needed to point all this out. Now, this is a photo that was taken of a person where he was using a chainsaw on pampas grass, and the blade caught him in the eye. So you can see the blade in his eyeball right there. And if you just had safety glasses on, that could have been prevented. And I'm not saying that using a chainsaw on grasses is the thing to do. Oh yeah, so if you have a weak stomach, I would turn your head for a second. But here's an example of where a guy made a mistake. And this happens to be a friend of mine, and he was using a chainsaw in his backyard, and the branch went the wrong way, and so did the blade. And he said that's not what hurt. What hurt was getting the stitches. So please be careful when you're out there messing with equipment. All right, so tools that I highly recommend. I've always been a fan of Felco's. I've used all other brands, and either they just don't last as long, they break all the time, and some of them are even really noisy, and they don't hold their edge. But this is a bypass pruner, and this is where the blade will actually cut through the branch instead of the anvil pruner, which is basically a pruner where the blade hits a solid surface when you cut through the branch. When you first buy these things, they're pretty sharp, but as time goes on, they get very dull, and then it starts smashing the branch instead of doing a clean cut. Then you have your bypass loppers versus your anvil loppers. And this is your folding saw, which is really cool. The Coronas actually is the ones that I use. They're about $10 or $15 cheaper. The Corona saws you can get usually at Ace Hardware. But if you put them side by side, they look just like each other. But let me tell you something, they're very, very sharp. So be very careful when you use them. Your pole pruner, this is a short version of Fiskars. And as I've mentioned in the past, this part right here is where you grab to make the cut. And if by any chance you're trying to reach up in the sky to be able to cut a branch, you grab this little ball right here at the end and you pull it, and the blade will make the cut as well. And then they have the long version of the pole pruners as well, and they're also bypass. Now, the cool tool that a lot of people love, and unfortunately, I found out that my wife loves this thing probably more than I do. She went into the woods in our property that we have and went berserk on some small pines. And my son and I had to use this, had to get a chipper to chip up all the small pine trees that she cut with it. And she kind of used this as a therapy. So wives love this thing too. It's a chainsaw that will cut 4 inches or smaller, battery operated, and it's very lightweight. The saw saw here we use to cut dead branches out of trees as well. This thing probably weighs 2 pounds max. And then you have your pole saw, and the batteries on all of these are interchangeable. And again, this is Black & Decker, and this is the Zawsaw Black & Decker, and this is the Gator Loppers is what they're called. You get them all on Amazon, and they're pretty inexpensive and very durable. And of course, for the extreme. Now, the fertilizer that we use is sold by Lesco. It's Site One sells this. And the reason I use this product is because it has a lot of micronutrients in it, as you can see, that's highlighted with the square. And then this time of year, if you haven't already started doing some growth regulators, you might want to really jump right on it. English ivy is what we've been spraying this on. This is Atramac as a growth retardant. This is only about $350, $400 a gallon. But you only use 2 ounces per gallon, and it really helps slow ivy and especially Elaeagnus down. And then the Cutlass, this is a little cheaper. Yeah, this is a granule. Let me go back. So the Atramac is actually a foliar systemic, which is where you actually spray it in the backpack sprayer. This is a granule that you put around the root system, and it's a root systemic. So it travels, once you water it in, it travels to the root system up to the foliage, and it stunts the growth as well. All right, shearing. This is probably my pet peeve of all pet peeves. This is the reason why I started my business. But if you do it long enough, this is what you'll end up getting. I have no idea where this is. Somebody shared this picture with me. And this is another type of shearing. You can see he cut the back of his head. I saw this guy and had to take the picture. All right, so shearing is basically where you are cutting one branch. Let me change the color. I'm not going to worry about it. So, yeah, bear with me. All right, you can see right here. So imagine getting your gas shears and you're cutting one little branch. Well, when you're shearing the top, you're making like 5 to 1,000 little cuts. Well, each one of those cuts produces a sucker. As you can see, this one just by itself has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and multiply that times 500, and then you go back and you shear it again, where you quadruple that amount of growth. So what's going to happen is that the foliage at the top and the sides are going to get so thick the air and light can't get into the center of the plant, so all the foliage falls off and you got a dome. All right, so this is shearing the anise. You can see it looks pretty rough. You can't look at this and tell me that this is healthy in any way for a shrub. This is where we rejuvenated, and rejuvenation is where you're reducing the size of the plant by half to 2/3 of its existing size. And it's very important that you explain to the customer that the reason why you're doing this is to fix a plant that's been sheared for so long, in order to rebuild that frame for it to produce new foliage, and be able that from that point on you can start working on the shrub. As you can see, this shrub's been sheared for quite a while, and you just have a dome. All right. And this is the top of that. That's only about 4 inches worth of foliage. And you can see we actually went in after this is the same shrub after we rejuvenated a couple of years later, and the homeowner wanted us to come in and thin it out. So on the kind of to the center, to the right of your screen, you can see where it come in, thinned it out, and to the left or toward the back, you can see where we hadn't hit yet. It's just gotten thick. Winged euonymus here. It's a little late for rejuvenation, but you can at least start thinking about it, for next year. The reason why it's getting a little late for any rejuvenation, except for a couple plants, is you have to put in consideration, is that plant going to produce foliage and harden off before it starts getting cold again? And again, it just depends on the plant. Some plants grow slower than others, and this happens to be one of them. All right, and this is what the euonymus looked like after it was rejuvenated. Things you can shear, however, are the dwarf Yaupons. And you can also rejuvenate these as well. And these can take a beating. So right now, if you have some that's overgrown, you can still get away with rejuvenating them. And you can see where we started. I think we brought these down by half their size. And with this, we did use we just use hand pruners to go in there and just take a lot of the cuts out. Gas shears, it just does more ripping than anything. It does save a little bit of time, but you're just going to have to go back behind and clean up the cuts. This is what one looks like after it's done. It looks pretty severe, especially to a customer. But so this is after. And so you can see, I took this picture after we rejuvenated it, and then just about an hour ago, with it raining, I went and took the picture of these again. So you can see this is before, this is after. We rejuvenated these Yaupons in February, end of February. So you can see that they've grown a good bit. All right, this is before, this is after. All right, These are some lower pedalums that were really, really large. They wanted them to be brought down by half. And you can see where we went in there. I don't know if you can see that guy in there that's to the left, but these are probably about 10, 12 foot tall. And we brought them down to about this height right here. And this is what they look like now. I literally just went and took this today. Pretty cool. All right. And then back to the rejuvenation on hollies. You can probably getting a little late to do it now, but February is a great time for this, cleaning it out as well, getting it out the thick branches out. So this is before March or April. This is before March. This is actually March or April. You can see the little yellow buds at the end of the yellow marker there where the black buds are. And this is in end of March, beginning of April. So rejuvenating upright tree form hollies is not a bad thing. All right, and here's some large ones that we actually did this year. Brought these down by half. And the only reason we had to bring them down that high is because if you could see above the crepe myrtles, there's a bunch of power lines. Well, the Georgia Power said either we have to cut these things down, get rid of them, or either we're going to have to rejuvenate them, which is what we're doing. I have not taken a picture of these guys yet. All right. And then proper pruning is basically in my conversations here is where you're pruning to a lateral. And a lateral is here is basically this branch right here coming off of a main branch. And what you're doing is you're redirecting growth. So if this is, for example, this cut right here, if there was a sidewalk that was running through here, going in that direction, obviously this would be a bad cut. This one right here actually would be a good cut because you're training that branch to go upward away from the sidewalk instead of into the sidewalk. Erase this with me. And I'm not used to going this fast on pruning seminars, but we just have a certain amount of time, so bear with me. I hope you guys are keeping up. All right, come on. All right, so here we're pruning to a lateral on this Asanqua branch. You can see here. All right, and basically all we're doing is we're just doing some light shaping. We're not trying to do anything major on this because of the this plant here is more espalier than a shrub. So you want to be careful about how much you're taking off. When you're pruning to a bud, you want to make sure that it's always in an angle. Reason why you prune into an angle instead of being flat across is so that where the water will run off the wound. The bud will actually produce a branch, so you can redirect the buds as well when you're pruning. And don't make the cut to where the angle is going in toward the bud. This would be the correct way. That's the incorrect way. All right. This is the leaf bud right here. And I don't know if you can see the wall in the background, but the branches is what we're taking out. This is the Espalier Asanqua that we're bringing in. And that's why I was showing you the little cuts on to either a leaflet or a branch. And we're trying to push it back to the edge of the sidewalk or driveway here. And this is what it looked like after we get done. So always taking out big branches is not the best thing to do. In this type of pruning here, you can do any time before it starts budding. All right, and then this is a topiary juniper that's in a pot. And she wanted me to give this thing another a shape as pom-pom. It's just lost all of its little pom-poms because she let it grow into each other. And this is where you're just making little nips on the ends. And this is how you want to achieve it. And one thing you want to make sure you don't do is make large cuts, because with junipers, if you prune too far in and you start seeing brown, it's kind of a point of no return. It just will not start producing any more foliage. So be very gentle on these. On the left, you can see it before, and on the right, you can see afterwards. All right, so using that same principle, this is some cypresses that have grown upward, and the homeowner actually do not like these going straight up like this. It was just the wrong variety that was planted. So what we're doing here is that we are bringing the cypresses down to about the height of the lower pedals right here, all the way across. And how you do that is that you're looking down into the shrub like this, and once you get to the point where the top would be really thin, is that's where you want to bring the top down to. Because if you go down too far where there's no foliage, the top's just not going to fill in. And I know that this is a little difficult to see, but once you start getting in there and doing it yourself, you'll really get a good idea. Sorry, I'm still playing around with this thing. All right, bear with me. All right, so now you can see where we're taking the tops out. The top is still looks more like a shrub now, and that's exactly what she wanted. All right, and you're not doing any harm to the shrub by pruning it like this. Now, if this plant was 10 years older, yeah, you may be playing with fire by doing that. All right, Japanese maples. During the winter time, this is a good, you want to go in and take all the dead out. You can see it a lot better. It's always a great time to go in and start taking out crossing branches. I personally like pruning Japanese maples in wintertime because I can see the frame a lot better. The times you do not want to prune the Japanese maples is when it's producing new foliage, and also the very heat of the summer. Because you will end up doing a sun scorch or creating a sun scorch situation. One thing you can do, or one thing that I do when I prune these, is I actually get up in the middle of the tree. I very rarely touch the outer part of the tree. I'm always going in the middle and taking out the dead, taking out the real thin, little spindly growth. And there's a lot of times you want to take out crossing branches, but there's sometimes when the tree is large, you just can't do it, because if you end up taking that crossing branch out, you could really make a big hole in the canopy. So every cut you make, you literally have to pay attention where you're making where you're pruning it at. Here I showed this picture because I'm using the sky as the filter. So when you're actually thinning it out, you want it to not be so thick, but thin like this. See the difference? All right. You're going through, taking out the nubs, cut it to the collar. And again, you can see where, because of the dead branch, it just, the decay still goes into the cambium. All right. And this is where a homeowner had propped up a branch and left a string on the branch. So anytime you're pruning any trees, always look for this, whether a homeowner did it, a landscaper may have done it just to pull a branch up, but don't ever leave these things on too long. All right, so this is a large Japanese maple that I thinned out. Now, this is one I just pruned Friday. If you see how thick this is, I took a lot of foliage out, and I'm going to try something I've never done on a PowerPoint. This is a little video. This is what that same tree I just showed you. Now look how thin it is. I didn't prune anything from the outside of it. It's all from the inside. So this is removing the dead and taking out a lot of unnecessary growth in here. And the goal here, as you can see, is you want to be able to see the silhouette of the branches as you're walking next to it. All right, 5 plants that need special pruning that I'm always asked about is hydrangeas, boxwoods, crepe myrtles, azaleas, and roses. The hydrangeas, if you haven't done any pruning on them now, it's a little late, but during the winter time is really a good time to prune, and also after they bloom. And the hydrangeas are just now budding up, so wouldn't be doing anything to them at this moment. This photo shows on the right-hand side is Endless Summer, left side is Nico Blues, and straight ahead is the Annabelle or Incrediballs. The biggest thing that you need to know about hydrangeas before you even put a pair of pruners on it is whether it blooms off of old wood or new wood. So it's really experience when it comes to these. A lot of telltales you can determine whether it blooms off of old or new wood is the bud. If the buds are really real small, more than likely it blooms off of new wood. If the buds are pretty big, like the Nico Blues, then it will bloom off the second year wood. However, the Endless Summer on the right, they bloom off of old and new wood. So, but if you're not sure, be on the safe side. So the mop heads, which is the Nico Blues, you want to start during the winter time when it doesn't have the leaves on it. Go ahead and start removing all the leaves and foliage from it. And if you're doing the maintenance on the properties as well, don't let this even happen to start off with. When you're blowing, don't blow the leaves or pine straw into the crown of the hydrangeas, because all it does is it cakes up, it holds water, and it will start creating a stem rot situation. So you want to, later in the winter, you're removing these leaves, be careful, because when the temperatures start getting warmer, you can see the new foliage that's coming up. So be gentle. Go ahead and cut the dead branches out. All right, all the way out if you can. Now, when you're pruning dead out of the hydrangeas, if you're looking at the top and you're seeing a branch that's dead, don't assume that that whole branch is dead. Follow that branch all the way down and make sure that there's no live branches coming off of it like this one here, because if you end up going all the way to the bottom without thinking twice about it, you're going to end up taking off a bunch of blooms inadvertently. All right, so these are Endless Summer here, and you can see where on the left-hand side, it's already been cleaned out, and just above it is where it's really thick. So you can see the difference on the after pruning it. That's the way they really need to look. All right. Then your limelights, your Tardiva hydrangeas, you want to bring them down. I would always say by 1/2 to 2/3. If they're young, 2/3 is always the best. If they're old and they have really thick trunks, a lot of times probably by 1/2. Just don't get into the old thick trunks, because I think you'll end up doing more damage than good. So this was done in February or March. I think it was pretty warm during February, and you can see the foliage is still on it. And this is what it looks like afterwards. All right. This is a tree form limelight hydrangea. Bringing it down a third is good. Don't ever get down there into the trunks, because the wounds are going to be too large. All right, and then you can see how short these limelights are. Don't be shy to wail on them. All right, oak leaf hydrangeas, they bloom off of old wood, so don't prune them too hard. Where the yellow markings are here is where the buds are, so you can prune a couple of these. If they're really tall spikes and they're distorting the shape of the plant, go ahead and stagger the cuts So that way, when they're producing foliage, which they won't be producing blooms on that branch, it will actually fill in the bottom part of the plant if it's leggy. Buddleias, I really would recommend pruning these after end of February, should I say, so that way you don't worry about um, doing a lot of damage. Don't get into the old trunks, pruning them. And the reason why you do prune these is a lot of times the foliage and the branches get heavy and the root system can't handle um, the weight, and it ends up toppling over, especially the newer plants. All right, got some boxwoods here. These some old boxwoods here. These are probably 100 years plus. What are the two things you should do before pruning boxwoods? Is have your pruners sanitized. And we use Lysol. We use the little spray bottle to keep with us. The rule that we always have, we keep a bottle in every truck. Whenever we step out on the property, we spray our pruners every single time. Another thing to look out for is boxwood blight. This is nasty, nasty, nasty. If you have one boxwood on the property that has boxwood blight, I don't even prune the property at all. I just tell them, sorry, one, we need to get it tested by UGA to see if it is blight, and if it is, it needs to be removed and um, taken care of. After that, if you feel comfortable that you won't spread the disease, then you can continue on. But this is what it looks like when someone shears the boxwoods when they do have boxwood blight, and it just spreads from one plant to another. So it's not a good deal, not a good thing. Korean boxwoods you can rejuvenate pretty dang hard. I would not recommend doing this to a American boxwood, but you can see that you can see right here how far we took them down. I believe it was we pruned them to where they would be 13 inches from the ground. And this was done at the end of February. End of April, you can see how much foliage came out. Then from that point on, you're just hand pruning them. Now this right here, these were sheared before we started taking over the property. So we don't actually shear these. We should actually hand prune these, thinning them out and keeping them this height. This is what it looks like after we've made one prune after the foliage has come out. You can keep them formal or in semi-formal, just doing some proper pruning. This is a Nellie R. Stevens. It was up against a building that we did at the same time. And again, this was in February, and everything came out perfectly. This is a large Korean boxwood that the first one I ever rejuvenated. Didn't know how it was going to turn out, but they allowed me to do an experiment. And this was done in February. And you can see in March, the foliage came out in April. You know, it's good to go, and you can give it some shape. Crepe myrtle. I know everybody here is familiar with this terminology, and it's not a good term to have in your portfolio. This is something that they should have just went ahead and cut it all the way down to the ground and retrained it. And this is crazy. I'm sure these were probably 20 to 30 foot tall, and they thought this was the proper way of rejuvenating a crepe myrtle. When you're doing that kind of bad pruning on crepe myrtles, this is something that you can have a problem with, is Ambrosian beetles. So this is the time to start looking out for them, because they will get into a weak trunk or a whole tree, and you have to cut it down and get rid of it. You don't have to prune a crepe myrtle if you don't want to, it's more for aesthetics than anything. And in general, just bringing it down by a third of its size is really a good thing, especially if it's up against a sidewalk or so. You do want to keep it kind of tall, so that way the new growth, when it comes out, it doesn't grow and the blooms lay on the driveway or the sidewalk. And in this situation, climbing up in it, we make the top look more like a parachute or snow cone versus the straight across. And we're going in, taking out the little spindly branches. And you could just use your gloves and just strip it down. That'd be the quickest way of doing it. Getting rid of all your dead nubs. Cut it to a collar to where you can have a good seal to the wound. And making sure that you're removing all the crossing branches, because if you don't do that, this is what's going to happen. The branches are probably going to fuse together, or the wind's going to rub them together and create a situation like this. But back to the shaping of it, you want to go ahead and just keep with the shape here. You can see on the right-hand side where I didn't prune it, on the left-hand side I did. And one thing I wanted to say at the beginning, but I didn't, always pick out the height that you want of the tree. Prune the center one first to measure the height. The second cut needs to be all the way to the left to where you want the lowest branches to be. After that, use your mind's eye and just follow that pattern and go from the right to the left or from the left to the right when you're pruning. Don't skip all over the place and start traveling all around the trees, because you're going to end up hurting yourself. It's more efficient when you stay in one place and work your way all the way around. This is what it should look like when you get done. This is an azalea. Looks more like a hydrangea. When you want to prune these, make sure that you get them pruned before the 4th of July. They're already starting to finish up their blooms. This is more like the Gigi Gerbings or the George Tabor that bloom only once. The encore azaleas, they bloom 2 or 3 times a year. You can start pruning them right after they bloom if you want to, if they need it, and just keep the shape. Now, when pruning these things, they always say, well, after the 4th of July, you can't prune these. Well, if you're doing it just for shape, taking out any wild growth, there's nothing wrong with doing that. The problem comes is when someone pulls out a pair of gas shears and ends up shaving the top or the sides, ends up taking out all the buds. And that's not a good idea. Good maintenance good maintenance for the azaleas after they've been pruned is a good fertilization program, and this is what you get, is a good set of blooms. Rejuvenating azaleas. My question is to everybody is, when's the best time to rejuvenate them? And it is in February, at the end of February, and that's for the health of the shrub, because the energy that from the root system will go to the new foliage instead of going to the bud and flower if you had rejuvenated it after it blooms. The rule of thumb, if you do want to rejuvenate it after it blooms, I always make sure that the homeowner has irrigation. That way, you know it's going to get some good moisture. But if it's not irrigated, I do not recommend rejuvenating them after they bloom. Roses, in general, prune late winter or early spring. This is the result that you get, is nice blooms, good shape. Knockout roses, good grief, the rosette virus is going crazy. past 2 or 3 years. And it's sad when you're having to tell the homeowner that you have to rip up 2 or 3, or if not all of their roses when you see this. So pruning your knockout roses, you want to bring these down by 2/3 or so, cleaning out the dead wood. You want to make sure that you're pruning in an angle. The bud should always be toward the outside of the cut and not toward the inside. So that way you want to train your new growth to grow outward and not inward into the center of the plant. Your hybrid teas, you can prune these as low as you want to. I never know who I'm talking to, so I always recommend 18 to 24 inches. But since you guys know what you're doing, you can go a lot lower. Your shrub roses, I always go in and take out the thicker trunks, sawing it out and then pulling it. When you pull it out, the plant will pretty much shrink itself, and then you go ahead and winter prune it. And then you don't want to prune these hard as hybrid teas. Yeah, you don't want, what? Let's get that. All right, the nubs that are left from a dead branch, you want to make sure that these are always cut to the collar, because if you don't, the collar can't really do anything. This is an example here. All right, and if you don't cut that nub out, it can decay and make a big hole or rot area. You can see on the right-hand side of this wound here where the collar is really, really thin. On the left side, the collar is thick. That means that the branch was pruned properly. If you have a thick collar, if it's thin, then that means it wasn't cut properly. 3-point cut is always the way to go. The first one is always about 6 inches or 8 inches above the collar, and then 2 inches above that, further out. Take the weight off of the branch, and then you cut the branch completely off. Just don't cut it into the collar, just the outside of the collar. This is a good example of a great cut. You can see it's not into the collar. Good swell here, and it's sealed really well. Make sure all your straps are off of it. You can see what happened here. Your large trees, sometimes the landscapers or even homeowners will leave the strap on. Make sure you always try to cut these off. At this point, there's really no hope for this. For your espalier plants or your vines, zip ties can be your best friend in a situation like this, because a lot of times the vines are really thick and they're going across the top of the garage. If you try to prune it to where you get it up the top of the garage, you may end up cutting some major vines and end up killing the whole top part of it. So if you use zip ties and pull them in tight onto the cable that's already attached to the wall, like this, for an example, you can actually pull them up and look really nice, and then you can just shape it up accordingly. Big difference. All right, so when you're pruning, if you have any questions, don't be shy to ask an expert on what they're doing. But whenever you're pruning, remember, when a homeowner comes home, they want to have a peace of mind. They want to know that we're doing our jobs properly. And you never know who's watching you. So do what's supposed to be done the right way, and try not to take any shortcuts. And thank you for your time. That's it. Anybody have any questions?
Rick, that was terrific.
Is it too late to prune the hybrid tea roses?
I would say it. You mean prune them hard?
Just shaped out.
No, you can shape them anytime. Prune them hard, yes. Shaping them, no, it's not.
Okay, cool.
Rick, what's your favorite plant to prune?
Japanese maple, the weeping dissectums. Did that video come out fine?
Yes, it did.
That's the first time I've ever done that on PowerPoint, so I wanted to see it. But that's, I would say hands down, that's my favorite because of the drastic effect that you get afterwards.
Right. What about fruit trees? Some of the ornamental fruit trees?
You can prune the ornamentals pretty much any time, just removing the sucker growth. I'm assuming when you say ornamental, or you just talking about like apples?
Yes, apples,
That you're
cherries, blueberries.
okay, that you want to eat the fruit.
Mhm.
So if you're pruning those, really late winter is really the best time to prune those. The apples, the peaches, the pears. Best way to prune those is when they're young, and you want to keep pruning them pretty hard, more than you would. You wouldn't want to prune a maple tree or an oak like you would a fruit. It's always going to be pretty rough because the energy is going to go into the root, to the fruit. Sorry.
When is the best time to prune Japanese black pine? And how do you handle pruning the candles, especially thundercloud? Good question.
Yeah, the thunderclouds, the candles, you probably need to go ahead and prune them now before the needles start forming on the candle. So usually on a thunderhead, you'll have 3 or 4 candles in one spot. And if you take the tallest ones and bring them down, usually by half to 2/3, and leave the smaller ones, you'll keep those little clouds. But if you don't take those candles off or prune them down, that's how those thunderheads get out of control fast. It's I wish everybody would do that. That was a really good question.
I did want to mention, you were talking about the boxwood issues with the blight. We did have a lunch and learn with Dr. Jean Williams Woodward last month, where she spoke for the entire hour about boxwood blight. But if you want to reference that, that's a real issue. And I think it's interesting, Rick, that you said you will not even go work in that property
No,
that has it.
I will not. I refuse. That's a tragic situation when homeowners have spent all this money, or they've been in the house for 20 years, and then a cat or a deer or a landscaper came in and the spores hit the boxwood, and it's devastating. And there's no easy way of telling the customer that you've got to get rid of this.
Yeah, that's a tough one to have to tell them, and tough information to have to get from your landscape professional. Be sure if you have any other questions, feel free to send them to me or to Rick.
Yeah, rsmith@pruningguru.com.
Thank you, Rick.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was terrific. I hope that you people who are on here will join us next week for our final spring landscape webinar with Dr. Shamet Joseph. And he'll just do a terrific job talking about turfgrass disease. And also, if you haven't registered yet, we are having our first live event on June 15th called Live at Last, a Zoom-free event. It's a purely social and networking event at the Tucker Brewing Company, June 15th from 5 to 8 p.m. So we hope we'll see everyone there. It's open to everyone in the industry just to get out and see each other's faces and not even have to wear masks. So looking forward to that.
And hopefully have the gas to get there.
Yeah, hopefully have the gas to get there. Thanks again, Rick. It was wonderful as always. So much great information.